Okay, so we're going to just talk about what our experience of the trade negotiation with the European Union was and what we learned along the way on investment. We knew trade deals were on the horizon, and trade deals have before affected a number of key areas in India. So we started to watch out for those trade deals. We learned the hard way with WTO, so we started to watch out. The biggest three that we started to follow, of course people were following also the regional ones, was the European Union one, the Swiss one, as I call it, and the US-India one, which could be a free trade agreement, which could also be a bilateral investment treaty. So a lot of groups got together and we called ourselves the forum. So from Foreign Direct Investment Watch, National Fish Workers Federation, Hawkers Federation, Intercultural Resources, Grain, Third World Network, New Trade Union Initiative, Lawyers Collective, MSF, all of us started to talk to each other. I think that is what the forum did to us. We started to talk to each other and learn from each other what we were really worried about. The Thai FTA Watch basically did a fantastic job of telling us what to expect on environment and what to expect on medicines. And rather late in the day, we learned from Gus Van what to expect in investment provisions. So what have we learned from trade deals? Medicines become like caviar and champagne, very expensive, we can't pay for them. The biggest problem was that India was the pharmacy of the developing world and medicines went from here to other developing countries. So for MSF, 180,000 patients, out of which 80% are dependent on Indian medicines. Big problem. What happened to us in WTO? We introduced a patent regime. One of the first drugs that got patented was a hepatitis C drug called pegylated interferon alpha 2A by Roche. It's $300 a week, pinches like hell, especially as MSF is still contemplating about putting patients on treatment. This is a big barrier. So we started to really worry about the trade deals. And of course we knew that the IP chapters, what they're going to have, because US had been negotiating, the European Union had been negotiating. I'm not going to go into the provisions because we're talking about investment. But we also started to understand, and I must say the Lancet article was an eye-opener for us, because the Lancet article talked about how Uruguay got sued under a bilateral investment treaty which they had signed with the Swiss. That's the first time I started to look at the text. Warning bells went off. How did they sue them? Why no domestic courts? Why are they suing them for a public health legislation? All of those things and more. We also knew that if tobacco can come under attack, tobacco control laws can come under attack, so can medicine laws come under attack. So we started to worry about both investment and intellectual property. What is in those investment provisions? We knew that instead of country suing country under the WTO, it was a company suing a country. Where? Not in domestic courts. Somewhere private, where people like us who actually watch court cases very closely and follow them, didn't have a say. We knew that they were using intellectual property as an excuse and saying that you're undermining our intellectual property, our investment in intellectual property, and you're expropriating the intellectual property, and using that as an excuse to sue Uruguay and now Australia. And then pharma started to make noises. They started to make noises vis-a-vis Australia and New Zealand. Why? Because they had a system of pricing medicines. And this is a very key part of the Australia and US FTA negotiations. So the US government and pharma companies got together and said, we want to change your pharmaceutical benefit scheme. Why? Because they didn't really like it. It gave them less profits. So what did they want? They wanted an investor-state dispute provision. The Australians resisted, thanks to Thomas Fons and others, and said, no, we don't want it. I think that is a very, very, very important part of the history on investment. But we didn't have the text. So we were waiting outside, we wrote polite letters, we filed right to information, didn't get it. So what did we resort to? We went to the Commerce Ministry every time they had negotiations, and we would embarrass the Indian government every time there were negotiations. So what happened? We got beaten up. And again, Second time we got beaten up. And by the third time we got beaten up, they said, take the text, get out. That was a tactic to get the text. So we got both. And thanks to the fact that MSF was not only watching intellectual property, but because of the Lancet agreement article, said, Leena, can you ask for the investment chapter also? So HIV positive group said, give us the investment chapter. So the guy who just wanted us out said, take both. He gave us both. Very happy. We started to analyze. Second step, we started to brief. At that time, we knew very little, but still we were saying we are concerned. And we showed the Lancet article to the bureaucrats and the negotiators. And then we followed it up with a very intense mobilization of thousands of people in New Delhi, which happened in March 2011. And all HIV positive groups along with MSF got together to say we do not want this free trade agreement. We want IP out of your EU-India FTA. But every time we made the point about intellectual property and investment. We never forgot that we also have to talk about the investment chapter. And protests intensified. They just absolutely started like fire to spread across the region. They also made people think about what was coming in the free trade agreements in that region. So I think in that sense in Asia, there's a big battle to be fought with the Europeans because they are now starting to talk about negotiations with Philippines, Indonesia, ASEAN, but also the Americans are not far behind. The Trans-Pacific agreement that Vietnam is involved in. Very important to remember because of the very same provisions of investment in that agreement as well. So we started to mobilize and put up a lot of information. This is the blog that we run, and we put up all documentation, films, pictures, policy papers on this blog. Our first win. They said we will take out data exclusivity on medicines from the free trade agreement, IP chapter. That was the first win. They took out patent term extension from the IP chapter. But we still haven't won the battle. We have other provisions on IP. But what happened on investment? What happened with the consistent work on investment was that Health Action International, Oxfam, MSF put out an excellent technical document, and I think it's the best articulation of policy vis-a-vis public health. And they said, we are concerned. And this was a document for the World Health Assembly. And they said, take intellectual property out of the investment definition, take investor-state dispute provision out. Very important. MSF saying that, HI saying that, Oxfam saying that, together. Define indirect expropriation in a manner that government regulation should not allow companies to sue us. Review and reform bits. Very important. Something that we all grappled with, what do we do with the previous bits? If you're telling them to take it out, doesn't make a difference, they use the other bit. But he started to say, no, we want you to reform bits. And on the other hand, the Australian government did a fantastic job, both on grounds of worrying about pharma companies suing them, and they already got sued by a tobacco company, and then the Hong Kong Australia bits, something that we knew was coming. And so they said, we are not going to put these provisions in any free trade agreement that we negotiate. So the Australia-India agreement will not have these provisions. But they also said we will not accept them. And it is the best articulation that I have seen of a progressive policy from a developed country government. And pharma companies always sue us. And what do? We turn the heat on them. They sued us in 2001, 45 companies, South Africa. We turned the heat on them. We did public demonstrations. We fought. Same with the Novartis case in India. Our fear, they'll take it out of our domestic courts and put it in arbitration, where we will not be able to find out what is going on. So we definitely don't think that we can live with this investor-state dispute. So that is a big concern. If all disputes go to this other arbitration, what will happen to the intense mobilization that we do on court cases? And the fact that judiciary is far more fair to public interest than anybody. The missing links in civil society. Tobacco groups are talking about carve-outs. That worries me. That really worries me. We have managed to come to a very strong position in India. And if tobacco groups start talking about carve-outs, that means The Europeans are going to tell the Indians, let's put a carve out, leave the investor-state dispute mechanism in. Not a good idea. Start with a strong negotiation position. The Indian government is already thinking about not giving the Europeans that provision. Take intellectual property out of this provision. If the carve-out section comes, we lose. According to me, the position that the tobacco groups are slowly coming to is not useful for the rest of public interest. Environment groups, completely silent. The biggest battles on Latin America have been on environment. We haven't learned from them, our groups are not talking about it. How can just MSF and HIV groups ask for all of this? We need the others to support us. Have we won the battle in the EU-India negotiations? Intellectual property, yes on 2 provisions, not on the rest. Investment, I think the tobacco groups I'm not happy with that position. Environment, still not happening. They haven't woken up. Agriculture, retail, yes maybe. I'm very glad Dharmender is here. We have fought very strong battle in India together. Fish workers, no. Government procurement, out there. So we're losing a lot more than we thought. But on investment, we come a long way. We got MSF, many of the HIV groups together on one position, Oxfam High supporting us. Never happened before. What we need is support. MSF cannot do this alone. It needs the support of other interest groups to be helping it. If the proposal to Margaret Chan is a carve-out, then MSF will back out. That will be the biggest mistake that will happen from the public health groups. And that's why I think if we have to have a dialogue, we have to have a dialogue with the tobacco groups on this. So this is my basic concern on what has been happening. And of course, questions.